guys, it's Tori and it's time for my July wrap-up. I had the most amazing reading month I've had in a long time. I read 3 books, so same as last month, but they were all huge, all well over 500 pages. So I feel super good about it. Also, I really enjoyed all of them. So like I said, amazing reading month. Let's just get into the books. So this first book I technically mostly read in June. However, there was like the last 300 pages that I had not read yet. That book is Oathbringer by Sanderson. This is a behemoth of a book, but it was so good. This is the 3rd book in the Stormlight Archive by Sanderson, which follows a world in which a millennia ago there were these people called the Knights Radiant who protected the world, protected humanity from its enemies, and one day they just sort of disappeared. They abandoned humanity, and ever since they've been seen as traitors. However, recently there have been signs that the Knights Radiant are rising again. We follow many perspectives, 3 main ones. Dalinar, who is a high prince in this world, and he has started to have these strange visions that he's working to understand. There's also Shalyn, whose family is in a really bad financial situation with the death of her father, and in order to pay off their debts, she is working to trick and con a princess in this world. And then we also follow Kaladin, who is a surgeon turned soldier turned slave. It's such an incredible series. There's a lot more to it than what I just explained. On the whole, I'd have to say the second one, Words of Radiance, is probably my favorite so far. I just felt like it was really good because I felt like there was a good balance between character-driven aspects and then plot-driven aspects, as well as it focused in more on the main focus of the plot of the whole series, whereas the first one was a lot more introductory. And this one I felt like was very character-driven. I mean, all of them have plot-driven elements to them, but I feel like this was the most character-driven of the 3, and with how long it is, it made it drag a little bit more for me in some parts, but I still really loved it. I loved the end. I'm pretty sure a lot of people feel like the end of this was rushed, and there were a lot of plot twists and things going on really fast. For me, it didn't bother me as much because it was a battle scene, a huge battle scene, and things happen really fast in battle. So it worked for me and it was fine. I really loved getting to know the characters more. I loved there was great representation of mental illness in this book, without shoving it down your throat. It was like if you understood these mental illnesses, you could recognize their representation in the book, but if you don't, then you might not. First of all, there's some representation of depression in this. One of the characters has depression. One of the characters struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder, and one of the characters actually struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder that turned into multiple personality disorder, with magical elements thrown into that, of course. But it was really fascinating to read it and kind of start to recognize that each of these 3 main characters has these mental illnesses in a fantasy setting. So there's magical elements added to it. But I really liked it. I also really liked in the end with the battle scene, there was like an Avengers Endgame moment, where like all these characters that you know and love are like coming together to fight, and it was so cool. I got so excited. I think one thing that's been bothering me in this series that I noticed a lot more reading this one is that I feel like there's a lot of information that the characters know that isn't really explained to the readers super well. And, for example, the different types of Knights Radiant, I feel like I'm getting really lost between the types. And in the back, there's, like, a glossary type thing that explains, like, the different types of powers and things like that. But it doesn't specifically go over all the types of Knights Radiant. And I kind of wish it would do that because I feel like I get really confused and lost. And also explaining the difference between each type, because I feel like, and maybe that will become more clear as time goes on in the series, and maybe Sanderson's purposely not making it super clear. But as of right now, it's just kind of frustrating because I feel like some of the different types have very similar powers, and so it's hard for me to tell the difference. Like, why are they called different things if they have almost the same types of powers? And so, anyway, I'm getting a little lost in that, but other than that, I really enjoyed this. Highly recommend this series if you are into epic fantasy and haven't read it yet, because it's amazing. So after I finished Oathbringer, I was still in the mood for I just wanted it to continue. I didn't want to stop. I felt like I was very invested in the world. That being said, even if the fourth one was out, which it's not, it would still be over 1,000 pages, and I didn't necessarily want to read another over 1,000-page book within the same series. Since I wanted more of the story, I figured I had another Brandon Sanderson that I had not read yet. It was a standalone, and I was like, I may as well pick that up. And I'm so glad I did, because I read Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. If you have read both of these books, you'll know there's an object that is in this book that appears in Oathbringer. Also, if you don't know, basically Brandon Sanderson, with all his adult epic fantasies, they're all part of the Cosmere, is what it's called. So it's basically like in the same universe. Not necessarily like the same planet, but like the same universe, and so they have some interconnections. So an object from Warbreaker appears in Oathbringer. You hear about this object right in the prologue, so it was perfect to read right after that. As soon as I read that, I was so pumped. It was just perfect to pick up because it was still Brandon Sanderson's writing style, and then it had that connection to Oathbringer without being the same story and burning me out. So this was amazing. This follows a world in which there's two kingdoms, one of which is Hallandren, where it's ruled by basically gods, these people who have died and then come back to life, different than they were before. They don't remember their previous lives, and they rule this world and are worshipped by their people. Then the other kingdom is Idris, which is ruled by the former royal family of Hallandren, who have been exiled. And basically many years before this, a treaty was made between the kingdoms that when the eldest daughter of the king of Idris turned 21, she would be sent to marry the god king of Hallandren. However, the king ends up sending his youngest daughter, Ciri, instead of Vivenna, the eldest. And so Ciri's thrown into this world of politics that she does not understand. And Vivenna ends up going after her to try to save her. I absolutely love this story. Ciri quickly became a favorite character of mine for the year. She was just fun, and she was wild and free without necessarily being a warrior or an assassin or anything like that. She just enjoyed the outdoors. Being the youngest child of the king, she was kind of a redundant child where she didn't really have much purpose, and so she's kind of lived her life just doing whatever she wants and not really being bothered for it. However, she's now becomes a key player in this political game, and so she's trying to figure things out, learn the politics, and understand the culture of this new kingdom. As I read from the perspective of other characters like her family, they clearly, right off the bat, I could tell they did not actually know Ciri as well as they thought they did. Specifically, Vivenna, her older sister, talks about her like she's this poor little girl and she won't be able to handle this new culture. And as I read that, I was like, you clearly don't know Ciri as well as you think you do. Because me reading from Ciri's perspective, I was like, Ciri's not like an innocent, perfect, angelic child like she's being pointed out to be. It was very interesting. I loved it. I did struggle to connect with Vivenna and the other main character we follow, Lightsong, who is one of the Hallandren gods, who doesn't even believe he's a god. And both of them were just a little harder for me to connect to, but I ended up loving them in the end. I feel like this is the most interesting of Brandon Sanderson's magic systems that I've read so far. This one is based on breath and colors, and it's really fascinating. I will say, I feel like if this was a series like Stormlight Archive, I think I would like this one better just because I like the world a little bit more and I feel a little more connected to the characters. But since it's a standalone, I don't like it as much as Stormlight Archive because I've gotten more from Stormlight Archive, if that makes sense. But I did really love this. I think I gave it like a 4.5 stars. One thing that bothered me is I felt the ending was a little bit rushed. I wish we had seen the aftermath of some of the decisions and events that occurred at the end a little bit more. I also feel like I would have liked a little more interaction at the end between the girls, Vivenna and Ciri, and their father. After everything that happened, I feel like I don't feel that sense of closure with that whole relationship, and I feel like I wish there had been a little bit more closure in that area. But other than that, like I said, I really, really love this book. This one was 650 pages-ish, a little over 650 pages. I feel like it's a really good place to start with Sanderson. I feel like either this or Mistborn are the best places to start based on what I've read so far, just because it has his style, it's a little easier to follow than like Stormlight Archive. Also, I think sometimes a standalone is nice. I mean, technically he is writing more. There's going to be a second Warbreaker now, but originally this was a standalone. I feel like this is just a really good place to start with his stuff, especially since it's a standalone. As of right now, it's a little less of a commitment. And the last book I read this month was so amazing. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's not another Brandon Sanderson, don't worry, but it is Les Misérables by Victor Hugo. This was so good. If you don't know anything about Les Misérables, basically it follows a man named Jean Valjean as he is an ex-convict for stealing a loaf of bread, and because of escape attempts he ends up serving for 20 years, gets away, but even when he gets out he's treated like trash by everybody, and everybody looks at him like he's the devil himself. And sorry, I know this is throwing off the white balance really bad, but whatever. He basically goes on this journey of changing himself, becoming a better person, and serving others. And then there's a ton of other characters who also play a huge role in the story, but that's the basic synopsis. It's 1,300 pages, so humongous. And I'm gonna put it down so it doesn't play with the white balance quite so much. But anyway, I loved the characters. I had seen the play, not the play, I've seen the movie with Anne Hathaway and Hugh Jackman, but I haven't seen the play. However, I have been discussing with my mom and she's told me a few of the things the play has that the movie didn't end up doing. So I knew the basics of this story, but I loved getting to know all the characters on a much deeper level, coming to see Jean Valjean's transformation at a much closer range. I love that despite the fact that all these people are going through these horrible things, they're all able to find something that brings them joy. It usually has to do with family, and it was just beautiful. I will say, because it's so long, I expected it to do this, but it has a lot of tangents that go on for pages and pages, just giving you in-depth history about all these random things in the story. It's still connected to the story, but it's just very long-winded, probably longer than it needs to be. But to be fair, at the time in this culture, like, they didn't have movies or a lot of the things we have today, and so reading a book that is a story but also involves philosophy and history was what they did in their free time. So I understand that, but I will say, if you want to read the whole thing just to say you did it and those tangents won't bother you too much, give it a shot. If it's something where you just want to read the story and you don't really care necessarily to be like, yeah, I read the unabridged version of Les Misérables, definitely probably go for the unabridged version, just because, like I said, there's a lot of long-winded tangents. In fact, the way this is organized is it has 5 parts. Each part includes several books, and each book includes several chapters, is how it's broken up. And so there would be entire, like, books within the parts. Some of the books were, like, 15 pages, whereas others were, like, 100. So, but there would be entire books just dedicated to a tangent. So, like, there was one about just the Battle of Waterloo. There was one about the sewers in Paris. I feel like it was fun to see, especially, like, the background of, like, the bishop, who really makes a huge impact on Jean Valjean. If you've seen the play or the movie, you know what I'm talking about. It was nice to see his background and understand how he came to be the person he is by the time he meets Jean Valjean. Also recognizing that he was a very, very good man without being perfect. And I think it made him more human, for the reader at least, and I really enjoyed that. Seeing that humanity in him. I think the one thing that bothered me the most is Cosette's character. I feel like she was being developed well up until she met and fell in love with Marius. Like, her whole personality was just about being in love with Marius, it felt like at that point. Like, there was nothing more to her than that, and I didn't love that. I wish she had been developed a little further. It just didn't really make sense to me that, like, her whole focus and her whole life was just focused on Marius. I'm like, I feel like you have normal people just think about more than just one thing. Like, you don't just think about one thing all the time. And so it just felt like she got to this point where she was just thinking about Marius all the time and nothing else mattered to her, and it was just a little annoying. Not all the female characters felt like that, though. It was just Cosette ended up feeling very flat as a character for me, which is unfortunate, especially with her background. You would think that she would be a little bit of a deeper character, but she just wasn't. I will say, too, the other thing that bothered me was I feel like there was a lot of convenient, like, weird, like, memory loss things going on. Like, there was a lot of, like, Victor Hugo being like, yeah, Jean Valjean didn't remember his family, even though he, like, grew up with these people for 20 years. Like, the 20 years in jail just, like, deleted all of that, and that just didn't make sense to me. I feel like he would think about it a little bit more, especially if that was, he may not have been super happy then, but I feel like he was happier, and I feel like he would hold on to that happiness from before, especially since that happiness and sense of duty towards his sister's family was what landed him in jail in the first place. I feel like it would mean more to him than it ended up meaning. Victor Hugo was just like, yeah, he, like, tried to find them after he got out and he couldn't, so he just, like, forgot about them. And I was like, I feel like I wish I had gotten a little bit more of his feelings towards his family, even if he never could find them again. And then with Cosette, like, she, like, forgets about her childhood a lot and how she, like, came to meet Jean Valjean, and I feel like what she went through wouldn't be just something she could forget, especially since she was 6 by the time she, like, got taken away. Like, I remember things from when I was 6, and I wasn't in a bad situation. If I was in a bad situation, it would probably be still pretty clear to me, and it's not like this idea of, like, she has PTSD and she's, like, blocked it out. It was just, like, she just, like, forgot and just was like, oh, this is just my life, and she, like, vaguely remembered, but not really. I don't know. I thought it was a little weird with that memory loss stuff. Other than that, I absolutely loved it. I'll hold it up again for this last little bit, but definitely a new favorite. When I reread this in the future, I will probably do an abridged version, just because, like I said, there were a lot of big tangents that once is enough. I don't feel the need to do it again. Maybe in, like, 20 years, I'll, like, reread the entire unabridged version, but for now, if I do reread it again anytime soon, it will probably be an abridged version. But I'm still glad I did this. Absolutely loved it. Definitely recommend if you're interested. So that is it. Those are the books. Woo, gosh, they're so big. These are the books that I read in the month of July. Let me know down below some of the books you read in July, particularly if they have become new favorites, as I would love to know. And I will see you next time. Bye!